I love having these conversations with you for a variety of reasons. But one, because, fundamentally we agree. We get to it in a different way, but we fundamentally agree. And I think, you're absolutely right that it seems as if uh, the, the 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 circumstances of everyday ordinary people don't really matter in the end. That what matters to these folk are the folk who have money, and this oligarchy defines what is valued from the top to the bottom. And then we have to ask the question: well, what is our recourse if that description is right? How do we hold off a kind of fatalism? How do we hold off a kind of pessimism when it seems as if this kind of one-dimensionality, right, is all that we got? Part of what I'm trying to do, though, is to understand what are the conditions necessary for us to continue to fight, to begin to figure out the puzzle, the riddle. How do I make sure that we're not completely defeated? Now, here's where I'm open to being convinced otherwise, Briahna.
Mm.
I think that if Trump is elected in this cycle, the hell that vulnerable people are going to catch is going to increase exponentially. I'm good. As in terms of our own individual lives.
Mm-hmm.
But what's going to happen structurally? What's going to happen to the most vulnerable among us, right? Democracy may very well be a wrap. It might already be, given what we've just described. So what I'm thinking about is how do we create the conditions necessary for us to make the moves that we need to make? And in this election, given the bad options we have, what do? Well, we got to hold off fascism, right? And we got to figure out how to hold the Democratic Party accountable. We got to do both of those at once. How do we do that at the local level, at the state level, and at the national level? And then what space is opened up post the 2024 election for us to do even more radical work? What's the condition for the possibility for us to do even more radical work is the question I'm grappling with. So I'm interested in your answer.
So for one, my ears kind of went to attention when I heard you formulate it as, I'm sorry if I'm not exactly paraphrasing it right, but what can we do to make sure that we can keep fighting? And I would frame it as, what can we do to make sure that we win? And here's why I think it's an important difference. Sometimes I think an analogy might be like we're in a car that's gone off a bridge and the windows are up, but it's slowly filling with water. Mm-hmm. And the argument for how to survive the longest is just to sit there with the windows up. The argument for how to survive is to break the windows, let the car filled with water so you can open the door and get free, right? Let the pressure come in the car so you can open the door and get up to the surface. And I do feel as though it's this neat neoliberal trick. It is not wrong to say that there are consequences for having a Trump, and I would also argue a Clinton, and I would also argue a Bush and a Reagan.
Right, I agree with that.
But how do you break out of the cycle of getting, frankly, worse and worse presidents? I don't think it's an accident that you have Trump now, after you have Bush, after you have Clinton, who was the one, by the way, the Democrat that we voted for, not me personally, obviously, but that was voted for, in second grade or whatever. But that was voted for as the better option, the lesser of the evils, who actually undid the welfare state.
Today we have an historic opportunity to make welfare what it was meant to be, a second chance, not a way of life. And even though the bill has serious flaws that are unrelated to welfare reform, I believe we have a duty to seize the opportunity it gives us to end welfare as we know it.
And who, did the war on drugs and mass incarceration and was able to accomplish things. What did they say? It takes a Democrat.
What she's referring to are the increased sentencing provisions of the 1994 crime bill. Here's what happened. Let's just tell the whole story. When I became president, the headlines in the newspapers were full of, now wait a minute, I listen to you, you listen to me. Wait. Here's what happened. Vice President Biden, you guys know Vice President Biden, whose family comes from Scranton. He was the chairman of the committee that had jurisdiction over this crime bill. I had an assault weapons ban in it. I had money for inner city kids for out-of-school activities. We had 110,000 police officers so we could put people on the street, not in these military vehicles, and the police would look like the people they were policing. We did all that. And Biden said, you can't pass this bill, the Republicans will kill it if you don't put more sentencing in. I talked to a lot of African American groups. They thought Black Lives Mattered. They said, take this bill.
It takes a Democrat to effectuate the worst of neoliberal policies, of conservative policies. Because otherwise, Democrats, as you're seeing right now with Joe Biden, who offered Republicans a draconian right-wing immigration policy that we would have been marching the streets over if it had been Donald Trump, we look the other way. Not we, but, you know, the Democratic media, the public, they look the other way. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is that even if I were to agree with you that it's important, the priority should be stopping Trump, I think that's premature. We're getting closer and closer to the election, but the argument should be, I think, from people who genuinely think that we need to stop Trump, people like my friend Kate Willett, who was just on the show, is that if you want Biden to win, you should be leaning on him hard right now to stop doing the things that are making him lose. And that includes putting pressure on him to end the war in Gaza. I don't see what I'm doing as hurting Biden. I think what Biden is doing is hurting Biden. And that the liberals, whatever you want to call it, would be serving the interests of making Biden more electable if they actually held him to account instead of trying to run cover for him at every turn.
So we're in agreement here, right? Remember, I'm saying we have to do two things at once, right? And one of the ways in which we can think about it is to kind of get out of the binary, that the only field of action is the national terrain, right? So are we buying ourselves time, right? I'm trying to figure out how to sit in the car analogy in the river, but what's going on downstream? What's happening in terms of local races? What's happening in terms of local politics, state politics? Because national Washington, D.C. is so dysfunctional, all the innovation is happening downstream anyway. So what are we doing to create the conditions under which the hard work that needs to happen close to the ground can happen? So oftentimes we got all of our chips in the battle for national office, when the interesting stuff is happening in mayoral races, is happening right in interesting community efforts around affordable housing, like we're trying to do here in Lawrence Township in New Jersey and across the board. So we have to think about part of the question or the difficulty is to thinking about this at various registers, right? So sometimes we're buying ourselves time so we can do the work downstream. And as we do the work downstream, creating the conditions to produce a better representative class, right? Better folk who can actually change the tone and timbre of our national politics. That's maybe naive, but that's an approach. And also, I think, I agree with you completely. There's no reason why we should be quiet in the face of these decisions, in the face of these policy decisions, right? Because what Biden is doing, triangulating with regards to immigration policy, right? What he's doing in Gaza, all of this, right, is, alienating the base. And the mantra, the base will come home, is insufficient. It's an illusion, right? And they say the base will come home because they constantly do what they do. And that is, they're trying to appeal to white independent work. This long-standing romance with the Reagan Democrat. They think they're constantly trying to get that particular voter. So I don't see us as in conflict here, right? In a way.
Well, the
although
conflict, Professor.
Although I
The conflict.
do
Okay, I'm
understand.
sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. The conflict is what?
The conflict is that I'm reading you saying, I'm hearing you saying, I'm reading what you've written, that you think it was. I can understand you saying you are that you think it was a mistake to vote for Jill Stein. At the same time that you are agreeing.
Let me be clear.
Yeah.
I didn't vote for Jill Stein. I didn't vote third party. I blanked out.
Right. So what you advised, what I remember you
Right.
advising and saying on air was that people or people who live in deep red states or deep blue states could vote their conscience, and that's a kind of political resistance that you would support. And I agree, although I'm a purple state girl too. All right. So but there's a world where in this moment, if one generally believes that one has to stop Donald Trump, the posture one could take, and I think would be useful for people who have access to kind of mainstream outlets to say, would be, I am willing to vote for Biden. I think that's a very useful formulation, more useful, frankly, than me, who's like a never Biden person. Like, ignore me, I'm a minority. But I think what is very useful is to say, I could vote for Biden, but this is what he would have to do. And frankly, I would like to vote for Biden, but my conscience demands that he first stop a genocide that Americans are paying for. I don't see how that could possibly be an objectionable stance. And it frustrates me to see so many progressive-minded elected officials, from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to Jamal Bowman and the like, who are very vocally criticizing Biden's posture in Gaza, but unwilling to say, I retract my endorsement on the condition of, I cannot support this president. And Rashida Tlaib seems to be the only one who will not just criticize Netanyahu, but will specifically say, Biden, you have blood on your hands. I think that everyone who is not doing what Rashida Tlaib is doing, and more, because I don't think Rashida Tlaib has said, I also won't vote for Biden. Maybe, I'm sure she feels that way, but she hasn't said it out loud yet. I think that if you really, really believe that Trump has to be stopped, you have to take a firmer hand, the same way we wouldn't have gotten the New Deal without the more radical communists, the same way that I don't think you get anywhere with Columbia and Harvard, who are being very draconian to students. Harvard didn't let its own valedictorian, like a Rhodes Scholar, graduate, because they will suffer no consequences for choosing the donor class again over the populace.
When you're in negotiations with these universities as professors, right? And you say that you have an offer from an outside school. So, Harvard is coming at me. They want to hire me. I think I'm going to leave. And you use this as a way of leveraging Princeton's response, right? The idea that you won't stay at Princeton, you might leave. And when you enter into negotiations, you have to honestly believe that you're not going to, if Princeton doesn't respond.
It cannot be an empty threat. Yes.
It can't be an empty threat. So the reason why I think some people don't make the move that you're calling for is because of the nature of the threat that Trumpism and MAGA Republicans represent.
Right. But then I agree, but then you lose. They know they got you.
Well, see, this is the challenge of the current moment. This is why I said I understand. You went from Bush 1 to Bush 2 from Reagan to Bush 2, Bush 1 to Bush 2 to Romney, all of them, right? But I don't want to exceptionalize Trump, but I am, right? This particular moment, these particular folk, for me, right, represent such a threat to the polity that we got to keep them out of office. And, here I could never imagine me agreeing with Adolph Reed in this regard, right? We got to keep, they represent such a threat to the polity. We got to keep them out. But we also got to hold Biden to account. How does one do that without being taken for granted? This is the conundrum, right? This is the conundrum, because at the end of the day, he's going to say, you're going to vote for me no matter what I do because you're worried about them. because you're
but
worried about him.
to me, it's not that hard a conundrum. You just don't vote for candidates that won't meet your red line, that won't meet the most baseline litmus test of don't do a genocide. And this exceptionalizing of Donald Trump, I got to say, I don't want to get into one of these endless tit for tats of like who's actually worse. It's hard. It's like slavery versus the Holocaust debate. Like, I'm not really interested in that. Like, the problem is that they're both bad, that we're having a conversation about slavery and the Holocaust. But it's difficult for me to look at Bill Clinton, frankly, and look at his violent assault on the social safety net.
Agreed.
And look at the consequences of the war on drugs and say, oh, did Donald Trump? I'm sorry, this is not to minimize anything that Donald Trump did. But are we really going to sit here and say Donald Trump did more harm to the American public than Bill Clinton did? Is that, or is he just louder and ruder and more openly racist and more in violation of norms? Okay, yeah. But like, are we being distracted by the fact that the guy's a brute and crass from the material reality of what they actually did to the country? And am I really being told that I have to vote for Clinton Part 2, who's going to be able to act with impunity in a lame duck term to undermine?
Will he be able to act with impunity?
You know, I'm sorry?
Do you think he will be able to act with impunity?
Biden?
Yeah, if he gets a second
He's acted
term.
with impunity for 4 years in his first term. He has even more impunity when he doesn't have any electoral concerns in his second term.
Mm-hmm.
This is, Biden is a man who in the middle of the Black Lives Matter protests said, F them kids, fund the police.
Mm-hmm.
And Black organizers around the country said, oh, well, we got to vote for him anyway because of Donald Trump. And so then our movements and our interests are thrown on the pyre over and over again for what? I mean, I'm curious. You've alluded to.
No, I hear you.
You've alluded to the fact that, was it Morehouse or at Princeton, they wanted to throw you out a bunch of times for at Morehouse. What were they trying to throw you out for? And how do you think about that? Do you think you were wrong?
No, I wasn't wrong. It's just administrations doing what administrations do.
Okay, but what were you doing?
Well, we demanded the resignation of the vice president of student affairs and
Why?
the person over financial. He was a dilettante. He was terrible. And financial aid director who treated us as if we were, mindless cavemen and the like. There were these moments where students were so diminished by the way the administration approached us and treated us that we needed to create a condition under which we can imagine being a Morehouse man differently.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, because I was student body president, they were supposed to pay for my room and board, and they refused. So the students at the AU Center started raising money for me to pay my room and board, and they ordered a cease and desist, and I refused. I ignored them when it took my philosophy exam. So administrations doing what administrations do. These were the 80s, and so we were doing what students do. I can't deny the force of your argument. I cannot deny the force of your argument. In 2016, I'm making a similar claim. I don't deny it. And we are the leaders we've been looking for. I'm trying to figure out how to release us from the stranglehold of so-called prophets, of forms of representation that betray the interest of everyday ordinary people. I want everyday ordinary people to understand their power, to be the leaders that they've been looking for. As Ms. Baker would say, strong people don't need strong leaders. I get the argument. I'm struggling with the dead. And I don't want to see any more
COVID.
Yeah, and I don't want to see any more dead people.
Well, Professor Glaude, I don't want to be this
Does that
person,
make sense?
but I hear you. I don't want to be this person, but here we are. 60,000 people die every single year from a lack of health insurance. 60,000 people die every year from preventable deaths from a lack of health insurance. During COVID, 15,000 people lost their health insurance because they lost their jobs, and we live in a backwater country that ties your ability to get health care to your ability to keep your job, which is a really weird pickle to be in when you get sick.
Weird pickle.
There was an opportunity with massive unemployment, Trump finally losing and Biden coming into office, a country on lockdown, to have a movement for healthcare that would prevent the reality that 60,000 people die every year from a lack of health insurance. And God knows there was some estimate that, I don't want to make up numbers now, but some huge number of lives could have been saved in COVID had people had healthcare, had people been given healthcare.
Agreed.
So, and that's not to mention the fact that America has 25% of the world's prison population with 5% of the world's population. All of the ways, I mean, you're from Moss Point, Mississippi, all of the ways that people in poor communities in Mississippi, the poorest state in the union, get hit with environmental racism, get toxified and killed, have lead in their pipes. Flint, Michigan is just a microcosm of the scenarios that are happening all across the country, are disproportionately victims of weather events like Hurricane Katrina, and on and on and on and on. There are all of these deaths that we're basically just grandfathering in to the status quo. And so it's not that I am indifferent to, of course not, the million lives that were lost in COVID, but I am, I guess, angry about the idea that those lives are being leveraged against the possibility of saving the lives of all of those that we've just assumed are going to die all the time, because there is always a new threat. It's a real threat. But what happens to all of those other ones that just keep being grandfathered in?
I want you to be more generous in your read of me in this moment. Right?
I don't mean that you are, of course not. I just mean generally speaking, the effect, I think, of all of us focusing really rightly on the threat against trans people, the threat against Muslims and the Muslim ban, the threat of COVID. All of these things are very real threats. But how do you why do we allow ourselves to get into a place where we feel like we have to pick and choose instead of compelling our prospective leaders like Joe Biden to say, you're going to deal with all of this the right way if you want to get back into the White House?
So what I meant by being more generous with me is to be more generous with what I meant by the dead. Right? And the dead wasn't just simply limited to COVID.
Okay.
Right? I'm thinking about the most vulnerable among us who will catch the most hell. Right? If Heritage 2025, becomes the policy of the land, becomes the law of the land. I'm thinking about, the conditions. I hear you. And I think politically, you and I are right in the same space in terms of policy commitments. Because you're absolutely right on all the scores that on all the things you just laid out. Am in a space where maybe I'm getting old. I don't know if I want to risk, right? The people who are on the front lines of the hell catching, having their lives descend even deeper into it, another circle of Dante's hell, as it were. How do we pursue the agenda that you just laid out clearly and as powerfully as you do over and over again, and as you've done with me today, is a question that I'm open to hearing. I think I'm trying to figure out in this moment how to open up space so that we can pursue it in a way that could actually happen.
Well, now we're back to the car, because I would argue that car is sinking farther and farther in Dante's hell either way, under either president. You can argue that it's dropping faster into the water under Trump than Biden, but it's dropping and the people inside are going to die. And I got to say, especially when I had my call-in show, I'm sorry to the call-in listeners who I keep using your anecdotes and I stopped the call-in show, and I know that I keep doing this, and I'm so sorry, but I am who I am, and I'm in my bubble, and I miss you, but you guys were the closest that I had to talking to people who are in very different social and economic circumstances than I am on all across the country. And so I really valued your input. And what I know is that when I'm talking to them, when I'm talking to my own family members, my working class family members back in Cleveland, I'm hearing a lot of those people who are often raised as the most vulnerable and who need to be protected in this moment saying, break the glass. Please break the glass. I can't take it anymore. I'm willing to take the risk. Break the glass. And so I'm in a position where I feel like, yeah, I'm privileged. I'm going to be okay. But maybe that's an argument for why I'm willing to put up with Biden and I shouldn't be. Not an argument, like a benevolent argument for why it's good on me to vote for Biden because I'm protecting the poor. It might be really the other way around. Hey, YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.